Imagine I hand you two games, and I tell you, with complete mathematical certainty, that if you play the first one on its own, you will lose money, slowly but surely, in every single session without exception. The second game is no better. Played in isolation, it follows the same pattern, bleeding you dry through a different mechanism, but arriving at the same conclusion. Now here is the question that reframes everything. What happens when you stop playing them separately and start alternating between them in a simple repeating pattern? The answer, which the physicist Juan Parrondo published in 1997, is that you win, consistently, provably, and across millions of simulated rounds. And this result, known as Parrondo's paradox, is one of the most disorienting discoveries in all of modern mathematics. Game A is almost embarrassingly simple. A coin flip with the coin ever so slightly tilted against you, giving you a 49.5% chance of winning, rather than the 50% you would need for a fair game. On any individual flip, the difference is nearly imperceptible, and you could easily ride a short winning streak without noticing the bias at all, but the math is patient, and over thousands of rounds this tiny edge compounds into a slow, grinding drift downward, your capital trending towards zero with a consistency that no amount of short-term luck can permanently reverse. If this were the only game available, the rational conclusion would simply be, never play. Game B is more complex, and this complexity is exactly what sets up Parrondo's paradox. Before every flip, the game checks one thing, whether your current capital is divisible by 3, because if it is, you are in the trap state, and you flip a coin that wins only 10% of the time, making a loss almost certain in that round. But if your capital is not divisible by 3, which happens the majority of the time, you flip a generous coin that wins 75% of the time, an excellent rate by any measure. The problem is that these two states interact in a way that makes the net expected value of game B, played on its own, still slightly negative. The trap state is punishing enough to drag the overall average below 0, even though you only land there occasionally. More interesting than game A, with real structure, and it still loses. With both games plotted independently across 500 rounds, the picture is unambiguous. Game A descends in its characteristic slow, nearly linear decline, while Game B traces a noisier path with more variance due to its two-state mechanic, but ultimately reaches the same downward destination. Any statistician looking at these two curves without further context would give you exactly the same advice. Both have negative expected value, and playing either one would be irrational, and for each game in isolation, that advice is completely correct. The only gap in the reasoning is the assumption that combining two losing processes must also produce a loss, which is precisely the assumption that Parrondo's work overturns. Now watch what happens to your capital when you alternate between the two games. Game A twice, then Game B twice, repeating throughout the session. The line does not decline. It climbs, slowly at first, with the variance you would expect from any probabilistic process, but the trend is unambiguous, upward, session after session, round after round. This has been proven mathematically through expected value analysis, verified independently by multiple researchers, and formalized using Markov chain theory. And what that proof establishes is that two games with individually negative expected values, combined in an alternating pattern, constitute a genuinely different mathematical object that carries a net positive expectation. The combination is not the sum of its parts, it is something new. The reason this works comes down to how often your capital lands on a multiple of 3, the trap state in Game B. Played alone, Game B tends to keep your capital near those multiples more than you would expect, because the unfavorable 10% coin creates a downward pull that is hard to escape once you are in it, leading to a self-reinforcing clustering around the trap. Game A disrupts this. By introducing its own small bias, it constantly nudges your capital through different states, breaking up the clustering that would otherwise keep cycling you back into the danger zone. When you then play Game B within the alternating sequence, you arrive at it with your capital more often in the favorable non-trap states, hitting the 75% coin more frequently than isolated Game B math would predict, and those extra wins are enough to flip the entire trend from negative to positive, not through luck, but through the structural coupling of two processes that each reshape the other's environment. Parrondo's paradox is not confined to abstract coin flips. The same underlying structure keeps appearing across biology, finance, and physics. In evolutionary biology, populations that switch between two individually suboptimal survival strategies can outcompete those locked into a single superior one, a behavior observed in bacterial persistence mechanisms and modeled extensively in evolutionary game theory. In financial markets, researchers have built Parrondo-inspired portfolio switching rules that improve long-run returns not by finding better individual assets, but by engineering the timing and pattern of transitions between underperforming ones in a way that cancels their individual individual losses. And at the molecular scale, the biological ratchet, the mechanism underlying ATP synthesis and muscle contraction, operates on formally identical principles, using thermal noise and asymmetric potential fields to generate directed motion from what appears to be pure randomness. Two individually directionless processes, given the right structural relationship, produce net forward movement. What Parrondo's paradox ultimately challenges is an assumption we rarely notice we are making, that the value of a combination is determined by the value of its parts. We evaluate strategies individually, rank them, and then assume that ranking tells us everything we need to know about which combinations to pursue. But Parrondo revealed an entire category of outcomes that individual evaluation simply cannot see. Emergent behaviors that arise only from specific interactions between components, behaviors that do not exist in either component alone and cannot be predicted from their separate properties. Two losing games, interacting through the right structure, produce a winning result. Two dead ends, connected correctly, become a path forward. And the question worth carrying from this is not just whether each piece of your strategy works in isolation, but whether you have been overlooking what happens when the pieces start working on each other.